Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development, and in particular the AWD 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class, I'm creating a series of video presentations based on the textbook that will be used for this class for the fall 2019 semester. That textbook is ProASP.NET MVC 5 in A-Press text by Adam Freeman, and I'm starting to work my way through Chapter 15 of 27. So I'm on the bottom of page 373 talking about URL patterns. As the author mentions here, the routing system works its magic via a set of routes, which comprise what's referred to as the URL schema or scheme for an application. In other words, the URLs that are going to correspond to the actions that you want to take place when different controller methods are called. Alright, the author says I do not need to manually type out all of the individual URLs I'm going to support in the applications. Rather, each route contains a pattern which is compared to incoming URLs. If the URL matches a pattern, alright, then it's used by the routing system for that URL. And it's important to realize it's the first pattern that's realized. Boom, that's the one that it'll go and work with. So let's start with a URL for the example application. Okay, http:// we've got our random port number /admin/index. So as mentioned here, URLs can be broken down into segments. The segments are the parts of the URL, and they include the host name and the query string, each separated by the // character. Notice here there are two segments, the first of which contains the word admin, alright, and the second of which contains the word index. In English, admin, as mentioned here, is associated with a controller we want to call, and index is associated with the action or the method of that controller that we want to have called. So this is saying we want you to go, and from the admin controller we want you to call the index method. As it says there, to the human eye it is obvious that the first segment relates to a controller and the second to an action. But we need to express the relationship in a way that the computer can understand it, so this is the way that it's done right here. So as the author says, when processing an incoming request, the job of the routing system is to match the URL that's been requested to a pattern that it matches, all right, in a special file that we'll look at in just a minute. All right. The segment variables are expressed in curly braces. This example again has two segment variables with the names controller and action. The author says, I say to match a pattern because an MVC application will typically have several routes, and the routing system will have to compare the URL to the pattern of each route until it finds a match. And if it doesn't, it'll typically should give you an error message or a file not found, something. See the note here on page 374, and that states that the routing system does not have any special knowledge of controllers and actions. It's just doing a mapping. So it's looking at segment variables and trying to find a match. So by default, our URL pattern, as it says here, will match the URL as long as the thing has got at the end two things. So notice 2, 2, 2. No problems. Even if this doesn't exist, this is what it's trying to match. Here we've only got one segment, so there's no match. Here we've got three segments, so there's no match. Now, one of the things that the author will talk about in this chapter and a little bit in the next is that URL patterns are kind of unique in that they're both conservative and they're liberal. They're conservative in that, for example, here these did not match because it was expecting two segments. So they're conservative in that they will only match URLs with the same number of segments that they expect. They're also liberal in that if you do have two of them, we probably don't have a method or an action called oranges, but it's going to go out and look for it anyway because we did match the pattern. It says these are the default behaviors, which are the keys to understanding how URL patterns function. As previously mentioned, the routing system does not have any knowledge about an MVC application. So URL patterns will match even if there's no controller or action that corresponds to what you put in there. All right? So here, notice they transposed index and admin. So it's going to be looking for the index controller and the admin method, even though that's not, that's not right. All right. Once you have a URL pattern in mind, you can use it to define a route. Routes are defined in the routeconfig.cs file. And routeconfig.cs is always found in the app start folder. So here we've got, I'm going to close a few of these things here. There's app start, and notice inside of there's route config. Notice that right now there's only one route that's registered. All right, so it's expecting by default that what we're working off of is the home controller, and if we don't give it the name of any method, that the method will want is the index method. So the authors, I just went over this with you. So the static register routes method that is defined here is called from global.ax.cs. There's global.asax, and underneath that is global.ax.cs. So notice there, application start, and there it's calling the register route method, and that register route method again is right there. So as mentioned here, the global ASAX file sets up some of the core features when the application is started. I just showed you the contents, and they're shown here also. And I mentioned that that was the method that's called. The application underscore start method is called by the underlying ASP.NET platform when the MVC application is first started. Okay, again, that's what leads to that register routes being called. The other call, as it says, sets up a related feature called areas. That's discussed in Chapter 16. All right. Listing 15.7 shows how to create a route using the example URL from the previous section. It says, I have removed the other statements in the method so I can focus on the example. So they're talking about this right here. As it says on the top of the next page, we created a new route using a URL pattern as a constructor parameter where we express it as a string. We also pass an instance of MVC route handler to the constructor. Now, different ASP.NET technologies provide different classes to tailor this routing behavior. This is the class that's used for ASP.NET MVC. Once we've created the name, and show it in the example here, we add it to the route controller object using the add method, and you can see that here. Passing in the name that we want the route to be known by and the actual route itself. All right. Now they've got a good tip here on page 377, which says naming your routes is optional, and a lot of people believe you shouldn't do it because it sacrifices some of the separation of concerns, or SOC, that we have talked about earlier. Okay. A more convenient way, I'm on the middle of 377 here, of registering routes is to use the map route method defined by the route controlling class. The listing that's here shows how we can use this method to register a route, which has the same effect as the previous example, but probably most people would consider that to be a much cleaner looking type of syntax. This approach, as mentioned down below, is more compact, mainly because we don't need to create an instance of the MVC route handler class. It's still done, but it's done behind the scenes. The map route method is solely for use with MVC applications. It says here we can see the effect of the simple route made by starting the example application. All right, so let's come in here and let's grab this, and hopefully I'm going to be doing this right. If I'm doing it wrong, we're going to know it very fast. How's that? I think we want to put that up here. We don't want to register routes there. We want just this and that. Okay. My route. Okay, controller action. Now I left the other one in there. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to do a save all here. It says we're going to see an error when you try to navigate to the root URL of the application, but if you navigate to a route that matches controller action, it should work. So we're going to try that. Now it may still work because I have this one in here, and if it doesn't find anything in the first route, it goes down to the second one. So see, it did work. So let's try taking this and there we go, commenting that out, and try to save it again. And let's try to run it again. Now we get an error message. The web server is configured to not list the contents of this directory. However, the author says if we put in admin index, it works. And what else did we have? I think we had customer. I don't remember if it was customer or customers. That works too. Now, if we just put in home with index, then it finds it. But by default, putting in nothing, it doesn't have a default anymore. That's why we're getting that error, because we took our default and we commented it out. Oops. There we go. Okay. It says there, the simple route listed here does not tell the MVC framework how to respond to requests from the root URL. It only supports a specific URL pattern like this one. All right. The author says he has temporarily taken a step back from the functionality that Visual Studio adds to route.config when it creates a project. However, what the author is going to be doing is going through here in more depth and breadth of coverage throughout the chapter. Again, I'm not going through this unit test stuff. So that's 378, 379, 380 up to the middle of page 381. Okay, so I'm jumping down to the middle of page 381, which, as you can see, is entitled Defining Default Values. All right, so the reason we got an error when we requested the default URL for the application is that it did not match the route defined. The default URL is expressed as tilde, which means basically the root, / to the routing system, and there are no segments here that can be matched to that. The author explained earlier that URL patterns are both conservative and liberal. They're conservative in that they will only match the URLs with the specified number of segments. The author also said this was the default behavior, and one way to change this behavior is to use default values. We have talked about default values in the past in the C# class under the confines of setting up parameters for different functions or methods so that if you don't pass something in, it'll use the default, no pun intended, by default. And I gave the answer or the example that if I'm creating something, let's say for, well, I'm looking here and I'm at 16 minutes. Before starting the default values, let's stop right here. And what we will do is we will pick it up again on the next, in the next.